The $400 million Qatar jet question that destroyed Pam Bondi, it lasted exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds that may have just ended a career and exposed the most brazen corruption scandal in modern American politics. Representative Madeleine Dean had just asked one simple question about a $400 million airplane gift from Qatar to Donald Trump. The Attorney General's response wasn't just evasive. It was the moment America watched their top law enforcement official choose foreign money over constitutional duty live on television. The question should have been easy. Is it true that you gave advice that this was legally permissible? But for Pam Bondi, former foreign agent for Qatar turned Attorney General, that question was kryptonite. Because answering honestly would expose the most corrupt relationship between a foreign government and American officials in decades. So instead of truth, America got deflection, hostility, and a constitutional crisis playing out in real time. But to understand why that single question destroyed Bondi's credibility forever, you need to know the backstory that she desperately hoped would never come to light. This isn't just about one expensive plane. This is about how foreign governments buy American officials, how those officials cash in their relationships when they assume power, and how Qatar successfully purchased influence at the highest levels of the Trump administration through one carefully cultivated former Attorney General. The story begins in 2019, when Pam Bondi was between government jobs and looking to cash in on her political connections. Fresh out of her role as Florida Attorney General and positioning herself for a potential return to federal service under Trump, Bondi did what many former officials do. She became a foreign agent, but her choice of client would come back to haunt her in ways she never imagined. Qatar wasn't just any foreign client. This was a country under intense international scrutiny for human rights violations, terrorist financing, and systematic abuse of migrant workers building World Cup infrastructure. As human rights organizations documented widespread forced labor, dangerous working conditions, and restrictions on worker freedom, Qatar needed American political figures who could help manage the growing criticism and provide political cover for ongoing abuses. Enter Pam Bondi, who registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act as a lobbyist for Qatar in what she would later describe as anti-human trafficking work. But federal registration documents tell a different story. Bondi's firm, Ballard Partners, was paid millions of dollars to provide government relations services that went far beyond any humanitarian mission. This was about political influence, access, and reputation management for an authoritarian regime facing global condemnation. The timing was suspicious. Bondi registered as a Qatar agent just as Trump's 2024 campaign was taking shape, and her name was being floated for potential cabinet positions. This wasn't coincidence. This was strategic positioning by someone who understood that foreign relationships established during political exile could become valuable assets when she returned to power. Qatar wasn't just hiring a former state attorney general, they were investing in a future federal official. But the real corruption began when Trump returned to office and nominated Bondi as attorney general. Suddenly, Qatar's former paid advocate was in position to control federal investigations, oversee foreign influence prosecutions, and advise the president on matters involving her former client. The conflicts of interest were so obvious that any ethical government would have required immediate recusal or disqualification. Instead, the Trump administration embraced the corruption. The $400 million airplane gift represents the ultimate symbol of this corrupt relationship. According to multiple reports, Qatar offered Trump a luxury aircraft worth nearly $500 million supposedly as a gesture of diplomatic friendship. But this wasn't diplomacy. This was Qatar cashing in their investment in Pam Bondi. The country that had paid her millions for influence was now offering her current boss hundreds of millions in gifts, and she was the one advising on whether it was legal. Think about that for a moment. A foreign government that had previously paid the Attorney General for access was now giving her boss the largest gift in presidential history. And she was the person determining whether such gifts violated federal law. The corruption was so blatant it defied belief, yet it was happening in plain sight with the full knowledge of the Justice Department. When Dean asked whether Bondi had advised Trump that accepting the Qatar jet was legally permissible, She was exposing this entire corrupt system. The question forced Bondi to choose between admitting she had advised on matters involving her former client, revealing obvious conflicts of interest, or claiming she had no role in the decision, suggesting incompetence or irrelevance. Either answer would have been devastating, which is why she chose a third option: complete stonewalling. I will not discuss any advice that my Office of Legal Counsel gives to the President of the United States on any matter. Bondi declared retreating behind claims of attorney-client privilege and executive secrecy, but that response actually made things worse, because it confirmed that she was indeed advising Trump on Qatar-related matters despite her obvious conflicts. She was essentially admitting that she hadn't recused herself from decisions involving her former client. The constitutional implications are staggering. The Attorney General is supposed to be the guardian of federal law, the person who ensures that foreign influence is prosecuted rather than accommodated. But Bondi's response revealed an official who was actively facilitating foreign influence while hiding behind legal technicalities to avoid accountability. This wasn't law enforcement. This was legalized bribery with the Justice Department's stamp of approval. Dean's question also exposed the broader pattern of foreign corruption that defines the Trump administration's approach to international relations. This isn't an isolated case of poor judgment or ethical confusion. This is systematic monetization of American foreign policy, where countries can buy influence by hiring future officials as foreign agents and then cashing in those relationships when they assume power. The Qatar connection reveals how this corruption works in practice. First, foreign governments identify American political figures likely to return to power. Then they hire those figures as consultants or advisors, establishing financial relationships that create implicit obligations. Finally, when those figures assume government positions, the foreign governments cash in their investments through favorable policies, reduced scrutiny, or direct benefits like $400 million airplane gifts. Bondi's case represents the perfect example of this corruption cycle. Qatar hired her when she was politically useful, but governmentally powerless. They maintained the relationship as her political prospects improved, and when she became Attorney General, they immediately moved to collect on their investment through the airplane gift, confident that their former agent would facilitate rather than investigate their influence operation. The airplane gift itself represents something unprecedented in American politics. Previous presidents have received official gifts from foreign governments, but these were typically ceremonial items of modest value that were immediately turned over to the National Archives. A $400 million luxury aircraft isn't a diplomatic courtesy. It is a massive financial benefit that creates obvious obligations and conflicts of interest. More troubling is Trump's casual attitude toward accepting such gifts. According to reports, he announced his intention to accept the Qatar jet because it was prettier than his current aircraft, as if aesthetic preferences were the relevant criteria for evaluating potential corruption. This wasn't careful consideration of ethical implications. This was treating foreign gifts like personal shopping opportunities. Bondi's role in facilitating this corruption makes her complicity complete. As Attorney General, she had the authority and responsibility to investigate foreign influence operations, prosecute violations of foreign agent registration requirements, and ensure that American officials weren't compromised by foreign financial relationships. Instead, she used her position to enable the very corruption she was supposed to prevent. The broader implications extend far beyond this single aircraft. If the Attorney General can advise on matters involving her former clients, if foreign governments can buy influence through strategic hiring of future officials, if massive gifts can be disguised as diplomatic courtesy, then the entire system of checks and balances that protects American democracy has been compromised. Dean's question was devastating because it forced all of these issues into the open. By asking whether Bondi had advised that the Qatar gift was legally permissible, she was essentially asking whether the Attorney General was using her legal authority to facilitate corruption involving her former client. The fact that Bondi couldn't answer directly proved that the answer was yes. The 47-second exchange that followed the question revealed everything about how the Trump administration approaches accountability and transparency. Instead of providing honest answers, Bondi attacked the questioner. Instead of addressing obvious conflicts of interest, she claimed executive privilege. Instead of demonstrating ethical leadership, she showed that loyalty to Trump trumped loyalty to law. But perhaps most damaging was Bondi's visible anger and defensiveness when confronted with her own ethical failures. This wasn't the calm authority of a law enforcement professional defending legitimate decisions. This was the desperate deflection of someone caught in obvious wrongdoing and scrambling to avoid accountability. The question destroyed Bondi's credibility because it exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of her tenure as Attorney General. She cannot simultaneously serve as an honest law enforcement official and as a facilitator of foreign corruption. She cannot prosecute foreign influence operations while personally benefiting from foreign influence relationships. She cannot advise on matters involving her former clients while claiming to provide independent legal counsel. Dean's question forced Bondi to choose between admitting corruption and claiming irrelevance, and her refusal to choose either option revealed the impossible position she had created for herself. By taking Qatar money while planning her return to government, by failing to recuse herself from Qatar-related matters, and by facilitating rather than investigating foreign influence, she had made herself unfit for the office she holds. The $400 million jet question matters because it represents a test of whether American democracy can still hold powerful people accountable for their actions. When foreign governments can buy attorney generals, when conflicts of interest are treated as political weapons rather than ethical requirements, when transparency is sacrificed for loyalty, then democracy itself is at risk. The destruction of Pam Bondi's credibility in those 47 seconds should serve as a warning to anyone who thinks they can profit from foreign relationships and then use government power to benefit their former clients. Dean's question proved that oversight still matters, that accountability is still possible, and that even the most powerful officials can be forced to face the consequences of their corruption. But the ultimate test will be whether Congress and the American people follow up on what Dean exposed. If Bondi remains in office despite obvious conflicts of interest, if the Qatar gift is accepted without consequences, if foreign influence continues to operate with impunity, then the warning becomes meaningless and the corruption becomes normalized. The $400 million question that destroyed Pam Bondi was really a question about whether America is still a nation of laws or has become an oligarchy where power and foreign money determine outcomes. The answer to that question will determine not just Bondi's fate, but the future of American democracy itself.